Welcome to the phase 4, the mindset phase. And depending on where you're coming from, this could easily be the most valuable portion of the entire course. And I say that because the more time I spend coaching athletes, working as a coach, and training myself, I realize that the biggest limitations are not in our body. It has nothing to do, or very little to do with your strength, your speed, your size, or everything else. It's almost always in here. And the problem is that the school system, no one teaches you how to develop your mind, how to think, the processes and principles behind developing a strong mind. Sure, you can go and lift and you can get a strong body, you can build muscles, you can develop all of that, but if you don't have a strong mind, if you're not training that just as hard, you're ultimately going to be limited. And now what we tend to do is limit ourselves by the achievements of people around us. For example, what the strongest person in the high school has lifted, what the fastest person in the world has run. And even outside of that, we have the arbitrary constraints. Have you ever noticed that when you're lifting weights, you get stuck at like 135 or 225, or if you're in kilos at 40 or 100 kilos, something like that? And it's very ironic that you got stuck at this perfect round number that has to do with a plate, right? Is that a true reflection of how strong you are, or have you got in your mind that that's a heavy weight, therefore it's difficult to do, and or going above that would be tough? So the more you can question these assumptions and do what's called looking at what the facts are versus the hypotheses, that is a very big distinction. Now, we walk around with a lot of hypotheses, things we think are true, but we have no idea if they are or not. And to be honest, most of this is because we're lazy and we don't really look up our own research. For example, I had a guy DM me the other day asking if I was worried about eating flax seeds or chia seeds because they've been shown to expand in water, and he had heard that somebody had choked on them because they had swollen up and blocked his throat. And so of course what I did, as I've learned over the years, is just do a quick Google search and see, is this even a thing? And of course there is one person who apparently already had trouble or difficulty swallowing that, yes, he took a whole spoonful of chia seeds and had a whole shot of water after, and they expanded in his throat. Does that mean that's an actual thing that will happen? Absolutely not. But was this kid who DM'd me worried about that? Absolutely. This is the problem with walking around with hypotheses and thinking that they're facts. How many things do you actually know to be factually true that you live by? Most of it isn't. Most of it is just hypotheses that you're like, well, I can't be that fast, or I couldn't dunk, or I can't play. I'm not good enough to play at college level. Anything. I'm not smart. I couldn't get an A in this. It doesn't matter what it is. We walk around with these half-formed notions about what we think is true, and then from those we make the facts that rule our life. So through this process, we're going to go and break down these hypotheses and think about what's actually true and what's a fact in our life, and what we want to live our life off of versus what is a story we tell ourselves that isn't serving us well. And so to start this first lesson, we're going to do a quick overview of how to set goals. Now, there's two things we're going to talk about. One is who you're setting the goal for, and two, how to do that. So the first part is the goal you set has to mean something to one person, you. It should not be for your parents, for your siblings, for your coach, for your friends, for your significant other. It does not matter what they think or what their opinion is. You need to be able to set goals for yourself. That is the most important aspect, because the number one reason that people fail in their goals is that they didn't really want that goal to begin with. They were doing it because they thought it would impress someone else. They thought it would make them feel better. They thought it would get their approval from friends, teachers, coaches, you name it. And they never actually stopped to think, what do I want? That may be the most powerful question you could ever ask yourself. What do you want? And that is what I want you to get in the habit of thinking, what do I want? And now we're going to go through in the next lesson how to break down your values to get a better idea of what you want. But start to ask yourself that question, what do you want? Once you have that, then you can start to think about what is meaningful for you. So if we're talking about sports and athleticism, you probably got into a sport because, your friends were doing it, your sister or siblings were doing it, or your parents wanted you to do it, and you kind of started. And then after a while, you kind of get used to it. And then one of two things happens. You either just say, well, I'm going to keep doing this because I've always done this. Or you say, I'm going to keep doing this because I want to do it. I love this and I want to be great at it. Now, those are big distinctions. We're going to talk about that later with the taking ownership portion. But the idea is that whole idea of setting a goal about what you're looking to do is based off what you want. And first you have to know what you value and why you're doing it, and then you can think about what you want within that. But assuming we have those pieces together, we're going to talk about this framework. It's called SMART, S-M-A-R-T. We're setting SMART goals. Now it's an acronym. S is for specific. The goal needs to be specific, something you can point to, repeat, dial down to a sentence and say it over and over again. It needs to be measurable. M is for measurable. That means you need to be able to quantify it. If you can't quantify it, you'll never know if it improves. So saying, I want to be faster is not a measurable goal. Saying, I want to improve my 40-yard dash by 1/10 of a second, that is measurable. All right, you see the big distinction there. 3, A, it needs to be attainable, which means it needs to be realistic. If I say I want to improve my 40-yard dash by 1.5 seconds and it's already at a 5 flat, that isn't attainable. That's not realistic, okay? So you need to think about the fact that it needs to be attainable. It needs to be something you can do, and it's the next step. And this is where people think, well, I don't want to set it too short because I'll never get there. But if you set it too big, you'll never get there and you'll lose that hope. So focus for this activity. We're not setting life visions and big overall arching things. We're setting short specific goals. So for this activity, think short attainable goals. Number 4, R, that is relevant. It needs to be relevant, meaning it's meaningful to you. All right. So understand that you can't just say, I want to run faster because I think it'll make me feel better, or I will, some externally motivated goal. That's not going to work. It needs to be relevant to you, meaning that it should play a part of what you're trying to do. For example, I want to improve my 40-yard dash by 0.2 of a second because that will get me a better roster spot, a higher position on the team so that I can play more and be on the starting team for the varsity football team. Like, that is a relevant goal. It's a part of a bigger process for you. And last one, T, needs to be time bound. You need to set a time within which you're going to do this. Now notice, if you just say, I want to lower my 40-yard dash by 0.2 of a second so that I can make my high school football team because that's one of the testing metrics they use, that's great. You've got specific, measurable, attainable, and relevant, but there's no time. So you haven't given yourself an ability to say, this is the end date, I need to have this by, I'm gonna work back from there. So thinking within the confines of 1 week can work. It's generally not long enough to make significant change, but 4, 8, 12 weeks are gonna be good. If you get outside of that 3-month period, it gets a little bit harder to actually focus on daily actions for that, all right? So to recap, the 2 lessons you wanna take from this are, goals need to be built around what you want and no one else. It needs to be primarily you. You can factor in other people, that's fine, but only if it also fits into what you want. And number 2, every goal you work through is going to be better if you build it off this SMART framework: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, relevant, and time bound, okay? Use those tools and you will set great goals that are very achievable and you'll continue to move forward.